The distinguished panelists for the session are Dr. Iqbal Singh, Visiting Research Associate Professor, ISS-NUS, Dr. Mohamed-Ali Adraoui, Mary Sklodowska Curie Fellow, Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. Chairing the session will be Dr. James M Dorsey, Senior Fellow at Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. I'll now hand the floor to Dr. Dorsey.
Thank you. And good afternoon and welcome to this last but promising and presumably interesting and exciting last workshop of the, or last panel of the workshop. I'm not going to go regurgitate the bios of both Iqbal and Muhammad Ali. They're known to many of you personally, and those who need a refresher can look at their bios in the program. And so for the sake of time, I'm going to start off with giving the floor to Iqbal, who's going to be speaking about identities in post-1947 Indian and Pakistani Punjab. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. When I joined this panel, this workshop relatively late, I was invited to replace somebody else who was supposed to be here. And when I was invited by Amit, I wrote the sentence down, which actually means nothing at all. From the conflict in Kashmir and international disputes over water resources to conflicting claims over historical figures, the partition of India continues to impact states in South Asia in numerous ways. So like I say, it means nothing at all. I wrote that down and thought, I'll come up with something. So I sort of pondered about what to do. And I looked at what I work on in general, and my work has primarily focused upon the engagements between Muslim intellectuals and Western social political thought, notions of nation, nationhood, state, and religious identity and all. But I've always also been very interested in how social identities in South Asia have actually been impacted by the partition of 1947. So not about religion and stuff impacting on leading to the partition, but the other way around, inverting the present a little bit. And this has in part been triggered by the fact that for decades on end, as a Sikh, whenever I've gone to the Sikh temple, the Gurdwara, I've often heard the collective prayer in which Sikhs collectively lament the fact that we have been separated from the place in which the first Sikh Guru, Guru Nanak, was born, and this is Nanyang, which is in Pakistan. So, and this is done in a collective way, what we call the Ardas, or the collective Ardas. And I'll just quote a very important stanza from the Ardas we have. A key stanza of the Sikh Ardas, or the collective prayer, which is an obligatory prayer for all Sikhs congregated at the Sikh religious site, reads, Hey Akal Purkh apne panth da sada sahai darajiyo, Sri Nankana Sahib te Gurdwara Gutama de, जिन्ना तो पंथ नूं विछोड़ा गया है, खुले दर्शन दीदार ते सेवा संभाल दान खालसा जी नूं बख्शो. My grandparents will be so proud. So I just have this in Punjabi. This essentially reads, O immortal being, eternal helper of his panth or his community, benevolent Lord, bestow on the religious community the beneficence of unobstructed visit and free management on Nankana side and other shrines and places of the Guru from which the religious community has been separated. This is always exciting. I was very curious about this time because Sikhs in the US, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand would all narrate this collectively. And these Sikhs are as separated from India as they are from the sites in Pakistan. But yet, the events of the partition have marked some sort of a collective dislocation in Sikh identity in itself, which continues to be pervasive. And this is also important because the Ardas itself is actually a canonization of key events in the Sikh past. So this location this location from Pakistan, but imagine this location for Sikhs who have never actually been born or experienced religious sites in South Asia, continues to be, is equated with some of the most pivotal moments in Sikh history. So I've always been interested in turning it the other way around, see how religious and social identities have done that. So in this paper, I want to tease out how transnational identities such as caste, religious and linguistic identities relate to and are reshaped by and resist the post-colonial state's attempts to shape a national identity and a national past. And I'll focus particularly on the province of Punjab in Pakistan. But I hope in the question and answer session to be able to expand it further to the province of Punjab in India as well. And Punjab, as we've learned, was one of the provinces that was partitioned in 1947. And I promised to try and entertain as well, so because I hope to do this by exploring the portrayal of two rebellious figures in Punjabi folklore. One, Maula Jat, and the other, Dullah Bhatti. Maula Jat is an extremely popular cinematic rebel who has featured in numerous Pakistani Punjabi films. I'll just show you an image of him actually. Let's remember that. Maula Jat is an extremely popular cinematic rebel who has featured in numerous Pakistani Punjabi films. Films featuring Maula Jat are largely centered around caste and regional pride and often demonstrate a rejection of state and religious institutions. Dullah Bhatti, on the other hand, I'll come to him in a second, is a 16th century rebel, and Maula Jat is thankfully purely fictional because he's incredibly violent as well. Dullah Bhatti is semi-fictional. He's a 16th century rebel who's celebrated for his resistance against the Mughal Emperor Iqbal. Though tales of Dullah Bhatti continue to be sung in India and Pakistan, post-1947 realities are reflected in the retellings. For instance, in some versions, Dullah Bhatti is the paradigm of Punjabi regional and Rajput caste pride, resisting the centralizing attempts of the foreign power, i.e. the Mughals. In others, he's actually portrayed as an orthodox Muslim resisting Akbar's irreligious empire. And yet in others, he's actually transformed into a Sikh who's resisting Muslim tyranny. So I'll come to that point in a second. Now before I go into the paper proper, just some very quick and very broad points about social political identities in post-colonial South Asia. I've used three categories in the title of the talk: caste, linguistic, and religion. Now, with regards to linguistic, because I'm focusing particularly on Pakistan, I'll just say this much, that in Pakistan there has been a concerted effort to develop and cultivate a national language, Urdu. Now, and we can, in the question and answer, we can discuss this if anybody is interested. But correlated to this is the fact that often regional languages are portrayed as unsophisticated, unstructured, and unsuitable for modernity itself. And in some cases, even portrayed as anti-Pakistani. But they continue to be extremely widely used as well. And this is an example of Punjabi cinema in Pakistan. Religion, as we all know from case studies from elsewhere as well, states play a role in defining orthodoxy by patronage, censorship, etc. And in the case of Pakistan, religion comes to be linked to official versions of nationalism as well. In official historiographies of Pakistan, you have a lot of emphasis on Islam and Muslims, and Islam and Muslims being connected to Muslim identity being connected to nationalism. In some cases, history textbooks trace the emergence of Pakistan even to the arrival of Islam in northwest India in early 8th century in itself as well. But I don't want to go too much in detail about this, but I hope to bring this out in the paper. The other issue is about caste. Now, there's very little scholarly attention paid to caste in Pakistan. And part of this is because there's a conception that Muslims do not abide by caste or do not ascribe to caste in any sense. But there's also another reason for this is partly because of the use of another term, biradri, which can mean a lot of communities, and these communities are flexible in their definitions itself. What I'm going to do is kind of try and highlight how this idea of caste, regional, and linguistic identities continue to be reified through popular forms of popular culture, such as this as well, and how they respond to the post-1947 realities. So let me start with Maula Jat itself. And I just mentioned caste, right? Now, as you can see from the name itself, Jat, that refers to a particular land-holding agricultural caste in Punjab. And what you find if you look at popular Punjabi films in Pakistan is that a number of them carry caste labels. And I'll exemplify this, but this phenomenon was actually ushered in by the movie Vaishya Jat, as you can see, which proved to be one, and its subsequent part 2 to it was called Maula Jat, the name of the character, which was produced in 1979. And this movie Maula Jat, and I'll show you an image of that as well, on the left there, which was produced in 1979, proved to be one of the biggest commercial successes in the history of Pakistani cinema. This was despite it officially actually being banned by the Zia-ul-Haq regime. That's interesting versions about how this happened. I hope to come back to that later. Now the character of Maula Jat first appears in an Urdu short story by Ahmad Nadeem Qasmi, who lived from 1916 to 2006, and this was entitled Gandasa. The short story revolves around the figure of a menacing ruffian called Maula Jat, who is out to enact revenge upon those involved in the murder of his father. Qasmi's story was the basis for the film Vaishya Jat, which you saw earlier, in which the legendary Pakistani actor Sultan Rahi, and that's the actor over there, the hero, the guy black, he essayed the role of Maula. Such was the popularity of the character that Sultan Rahi was to go on to play Maula in a host of films including Maula Jat, 1979, Jat in London, this is amazing, Jat in London, in front of Big Ben. I actually have a t-shirt of that with him in front of Big Ben with the blood flowing down. But I'm a bit perturbed to wear that. I thought, it might be misconstrued. So Jat in London, Maula Baksh, 1988, in Gandasa in 1991, Maula Temuko in 1991. I can go on and on and on. In short, one would not be wrong in surmising that the character of Maula Jat has actually emerged as one of the most successful superhero franchises, albeit an unofficial one in South Asian cinema today. The popularity of the character of Maula and the success of the films by Maula Jat established a new highly popular genre of films and signaled the emergence of a new type of a hero, a revenge-seeking, hyper-masculine, rural and proudly violent figure. Sultan Rahi, who appeared in more than 700 Punjabi and Urdu films, embodied this new type of hero. Both the popularity of the character of Maula Jat and the emergence of Sultan Rahi as the previously reigning superstar of Pakistani cinema symbolize an important shift in Pakistani popular culture. Prior to this, the quintessential hero in most Pakistani films has been depicted as being educated, Urdu-speaking, morally upright, well-groomed and soft-spoken. These were the qualities that represented manliness in the initial decades of Pakistani cinema. A manliness that encapsulated the ideals and visions of nation building in the young state of Pakistan. The emphasis here was on the inner character of man with a stress on self-control, discipline and sacrifice. And from what I've said, there are highly important gender implications as well. I'm deliberately using the word man there. We're open to discussing that later as well. In contrast, Maula Jat and the actor Sultan Rahi marked the emergence of a new type of a hero. One who was rural, loud, hyper-masculine, unabashedly violent, fluent in colloquial Punjabi. That's important here. And had very little to do with the nation or the state. In terms of dress, conduct, speech and values, Maula was at odds with previous representations of heroes and the ideals of nation building. In many ways, he posed a challenge to nationalist visions. He was firmly grounded in a regional identity, Punjabi, celebrated communal alliances, including caste, over national identity, and displayed total disregard towards the everyday institutions of the state, primarily the police and judiciary. And what's really peculiar about, and very interesting about Pakistani Punjabi films throughout the 70s and 80s, is that when they refer to Punjab, they often use the term Sara Punjab, or all of Punjab, instead of just referring to Punjab. So maybe I'm reading too much into it, but there seems to be a deliberate attempt to say all of Punjab rather than just Punjab itself. So, and the other thing is, when you, in these films, you very rarely hear Pakistan being mentioned or any sort of state emblems being on display. So it's sort of interesting about how the colloquial cinema depicts the landscape itself as well. The commercial success of films like Maula Jat firmly established the ascendancy of a new genre of Pakistani Punjabi films, and these were actually influential in shaping Punjabi popular culture in India as well. So I don't do this with my own children, but when I was young, we grew up watching these films. I don't know how to rationalize that. I don't allow my children to watch these films now. But, and I'm going to skip ahead because I've got an eye on the clock as well. But what I do want to point out before coming to the other figure is, skip ahead too much. This shift from the presentation of a hero as Urdu-speaking, genteel, embedded in nationalism towards the valorization of such a figure, I don't want to romanticize it as just a carryover of pre-partition identity, but located within a certain socio-political context of Pakistan itself. At the level of political discourse, the 1970s witnessed a new emphasis on populism targeted at segments of the society, the urban poor and rural masses, that had felt marginalized by the political elite and disconnected from the visions of national development, tellingly reflected in the political slogan adopted by the Pakistan People's Party, Roti Kapda Makan, food, clothing and shelter, and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who consciously modeled himself as a champion of the masses. This shift in political discourse was also accompanied by a renewed pride in traditional rural values and attire. The PPP, however, was unable to transform itself from a popular movement into a modern party of government. While Bhutto himself remained popular with the urban and rural masses, the PPP's failure to usher in promised political and economic reforms marginalized large sections of society, and the party itself ended up relying on large landmarks for support. Subsequently, the period witnessed the emergence of a dictatorship that sought to win legitimacy and provide a new basis for national unity by pursuing a policy of Islamization. This was Ziaul's regime, which was ushered in after coup in 1977. And this was actually the longest period of military rule in Pakistan. It may be worth noting that Zia's period, much more so than previous military rulers, Ayub Khan or Yahya Khan, asserted the importance of having one strong male leader who would be able to use coercion and force to administer justice. The new hero, as characterized by Maula Jat, reflected these developments in the socio-political milieu, shedding Western attire and sherwanis with a long coat, and usually associated with genteel figures, which came to be associated with gentle figures in the urban elite, was now clad in kurta and chadra, or the long coat, long cloth tied from waist down. And it symbolized the celebration of what was seen by many as the real and manly rural folk as opposed to the urban sections of Pakistan. In fact, the only, in films such as this, the only individuals depicted in Western attire were the police, judges, and often medical staff. Medical staff, because these films are full of violence, so basically they get shot numerous times with helicopter and stuff. And whenever they go to official sites, right, it's always a peculiar scene in most of these films. They speak in colloquial Punjabi, and the state officials are depicted as unable to understand them. So this is a deliberately done attempt as well to kind of display a disjunction between the regional identity and the Urdu-based state identity. Now, I don't want to go into too much of a detailed discussion about this film as well. I just want to use this to portray the importance of colloquial and linguistic identity and caste identity in popular culture itself. But I do want to end my discussion on Maula Jat with is that in essence, the Maula Jat films depict a rural social order that is centered around caste identities. And what you find is subsequently a number of films emerge in which caste titles like Dara Gujjar, and my favorite, Jat Gujjar Te Na. So it's like, for those of you who watch Bollywood films, Amar and Anthony, the kind of three communities. So you have three caste communities, the Gujjar, Jat and Nath coming together, symbolizing what it meant to be Punjabi at that point in time. Now, I'm going to skip ahead now to the next figure I want to discuss, because here we get into interesting terrain about the use of kissas, or I should describe it as narrative tales, folk tales, but they're in narrative structure that are sung orally. So what you have is a strong tradition of singers, such as they usually called Merasis in North India and Pakistan, who continue to be very popular in narrating these folk ballads in particular. But you also have chapbooks that are published such as these. And these are chapbooks that I'm actually looking at the moment on my own research project. And this is on Dullah Bhatti itself, this figure I want to now address. And that's the statue of Dullah Bhatti there. Now, Dullah Bhatti is a heroic rebel celebrated for rebelling against the Mughal Emperor Akbar. There are a number of films that have been made about him as well, and his number of ballads are sung about him. But each one of these has some sort of varying telling of his life itself. And its various tellings reflect collective representation and identity formation or versions of local history that challenge official historiography and national ideologies. Thus, instead of searching for some sort of authentic version of this man's life, what interests me is actually the variations in this tale. And generally speaking, there are two broad variations that one can locate in Pakistan itself. One, the first narrative is that Dullah's rebellion was against a usurping empire, and it was reflective of Punjab's unique identity and Punjab's valor against the Mughal Empire. The second narrative is that of Dullah's uprising actually being one against an un-Islamic ruler. So let me start with the first one and see how that plays out. Now I won't go into too much about Dullah Bhatti's life, but I just want to say this much about who he was. He is actually a historical figure that we can locate in the 16th century. We don't have too much information about him, but we do know this much, that his father and grandfather were actually executed by Iqbal because they were accused of banditry. And when Dullah was growing up, and this is where we go into the terrain of the ballad and folklore, we don't know any more than that. The ballads and folklore sing about a very valorous man who's embedded in Rajput identity. But they also talk about something very peculiarly, something quite interesting, which is that when Akbar's wife gave birth to Salim, her son, Jahangir, Akbar was actually apparently advised, this is the terrain of ballads, right? So, was actually apparently advised that the Mughals are unmanly, and if you want Salim to be a good ruler, you need to have him suckled by the mother of a valorous boy. So therefore, the Rajputs were the valorous individuals, but they had to be Punjabi Rajputs as well. So what you find is the ballads sing about Salim actually being sent to live with, or to be raised by Dullah's mother, which is peculiar. On one hand, you executed their father, but the idea of a valorous Rajput woman, etc. And of course, then he grows up to do all sorts of manly things like breaking pots on women's heads, running around town, and stuff like that. But at a certain stage, he's highlighted to the fact that he's not actually taken revenge for his father. And so the first narrative argues that he sets up an army of other manly groups, which happen to include caste groups like the Jat and the Gujars again. So again, you have these caste affiliations that are coming together. And I'm going to skip ahead again because this is taking more time than I should. And what you have is, in these ballads, a repeated stress on deceit on the part of the Mughals. So what you find is, and I'm going to simplify very interesting stories in themselves. What you have is repeated portrayals of Dullah Bhatti riding out to fight against the Mughals, and the Mughals using deceit against him. So they kidnap his women, his wife, and they always refer to them as his women, his wife, his daughter, etc., and he fights for them again. And then they tempt him to have a reconciliation by basically offering alcohol, which is laced with some sort of drugs, and then he's taken off to Delhi and blah blah blah, and then he's executed by Akbar itself. So on one hand, you have this portrayal, but the repeated stress on the deceit on the part of the Mughals, and they haven't taken women. It's interesting that it speaks to the portrayal of the Mughal Empire and the Mughals as being dishonorable, unmanly, and illegitimate. And what you find is through Dullah Bhatti, the region of Punjab comes to be presented as one that is masculine and in open rebellion against the uprising, centralizing, and culturally imperialist power. Such a description of Punjab as a province of the brave that resists the centralizing and illegitimate centralizing state allows this story to be appropriated by various figures, including supporters of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Now, when Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had been detained by Zia-ul Haq, what you found was a number of supporters of the PPP actually employed the Dullah Bhatti story to argue that Zia-ul Haq was the equivalent of Akbar and Bhutto was the equivalent of Dullah Bhatti. How they describe the logic? Bhutto's family happened to be of Rajput origin. So the caste element came in again in an interesting way. Now, what is more important is that the proponents of Punjabiyat, or this idea that Punjab was a unique province in Pakistan and that the Punjabi language had to be developed and cultivated, these groups also developed this story. In fact, what you find is that Dullah Bhatti featured heavily in the work of proponents of Punjabiyat who sought to pose a challenge to the state-imposed dominance of Urdu. Important intellectuals and writers in Pakistan such as Nazim Hussain Syed and Muhammad-Ali Adraoui, who actually became the chief minister of Punjab as well, employed Dullah Bhatti as a metaphor and symbol to demonstrate the heroic spirit of the Punjab and perhaps more importantly its tradition of resisting political and cultural domination. And they wrote stories about Dullah Bhatti, and these were, now what we had was Dullah Bhatti being transformed from a tradition that was sung on the streets or in villages into high culture as well. But the emphasis on Punjab as this rebellious province remained. And I don't have time to go into too much about that, but I do want to point out, right, that during the Zia-ul-Haq regime, opportunities to openly write about regional identity were curtailed. As a result, a number of works by the proponents of the Punjabiyat were banned or censored. It is precisely in such context of censorship and control over the realms of education that the importance of oral traditions and counter histories need to be noted. What I do propose is when you find, when you look at, when you actually pay attention to stories that have been sung, continue to be sung in Pakistan today, what you often get is a counter history in these oral traditions to the official written history textbooks or the nation's history as well. I just want to end, I think my time is up, so I just want to end by coming back to this image as well. And this is actually supposed to be his grave, and there's a lot of lamentation on Facebook by the Rajput Samaj in Pakistan, the Rajput community in Pakistan, about the lack of valorization of Dullah Bhatti in Pakistani history. He's seen to that. And that image that you have up there is actually from Dullah Bhatti's Facebook page, by the way. So somebody's actually set it up. But I just want to end by coming back to this, by just culminating in the second portrayal, the second narrative. In the second narrative of Dullah Bhatti, he is actually rising up against Akbar, not because of just regional identity, but primarily because Akbar is portrayed as imposing Deen-e-Ilahi. And it's a very complex story, but basically a version of his own interpretation of religion, not just Islam, but religion, world religion itself. And Dullah Bhatti is portrayed as an Orthodox Muslim who is rising up against Akbar. And here you have something really interesting going on, because on one hand you have the regional identity, you have the Rajput identity, but also coalesced with actually official versions of textbook history in Pakistan, where Akbar is always seen as a figure that's not really the epitome of Muslim identity. So these stories are complex, they transform and they take new lives in different ways. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Iqbal. Mohamed-Ali.
Well, good afternoon to all of you. Thank you very much for being here. Thanks to the organizers. Thank you, James. Thanks to Victor, my dear friend. It's always a pleasure to be back in Singapore. It's like being home. Actually, I have to start by confessing something. I'm probably here the only researcher not working on partitions. My main field of study has to do with radical Islam or political Islam. And I've been collecting for years now, data on how Muslim brothers, Salafis, jihadists, have been reacting, have reacted to such, to some sorts of events. And when I was asked, discuss the issue of how some Islamist movements have reacted or have framed the issue of the partition of Palestine, because you know that Islamism is mainly, at least at that time, Middle Eastern reality. Of course, you have Pakistan, you have many countries, but my main field of study has to do with the Arab Islamists. I said, okay, I can do something, I can do a presentation on how the Muslim brothers, especially in Palestine and Syria, have reacted and what they have said, what they have done the actions they have undertaken when it comes to the partition of Palestine, mandatory Palestine in 1947. When I mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood, I first of all referred to this movement designed to restore a called purity of Islam in terms of social model, in terms of faith, in terms of practice, in terms of political agenda, and the idea, you know, of seeing, I mean, of answering to the question how the Islamists, the Muslim Brothers in these two places, in Syria and Palestine, in historical Palestine and Greater Syria, how these people, these religious and political activists, you know, have understood the issue of partition is extremely interesting, because actually, according to me and according to many people, it reveals the importance of Palestine as, first of all, a geographical reality, a social issue, and of course, lack of a religious challenge. Let me start by saying a few words, you know, about the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine. At that time, in 1947, November 1947, the movement had 3 deputies, of whom the main one, Mohammed Mubarak, a very famous Muslim brother, nothing to do with Mohammed Mubarak, the former president of Egypt. And several more sympathizers in the parliament, but is more properly considered as a religious organization active in politics only as a means to achieve widespread anti-secular reform. The government at that time, in Palestine, officially recognizes the group as a non-political association. The strength of the society is difficult to estimate at that time, but there are perhaps 10,000 active members, and it's showing in 1947, a few months before the partition, the election in 1947. It was extremely impressive according to the papers at that time. That's how they described the demonstration organized by the Muslim Brothers. Sheikh Mustafa Sidari, another Muslim brother, at that time is the chairman of the association's central committee, and he's also the editor of the Brotherhood's paper, Al-Manar, headlines in English, and the claim circulation at that time of Al-Manar is said to be 6,000 daily. The Brotherhood's program is intensely anti-foreign and while tolerant of other truly religious religions. It demands for Muslims a return to the old traditions and customs of Islam. And it strongly opposes the separation of the state from religion and also stands against Zionism, colonialism, and communism. The idea of establishing a branch, chapter, or cell of this religious group in this country appears to have originated with one called Shukri Kutela, a member of a moderately placed Muslim family in Jerusalem, who is by profession a printer and a newspaper correspondent. And it appears that while visiting the Alamein battlefield in Egypt in 1943, you know the Battle of Alamein, General Montgomery, Qutala made the acquaintance of Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, the leader of the movement in Cairo, and apparently Qutala was much impressed with al-Banna's personality and maintained a steady contact with him over a period of a couple of years. When in 1945 there were in Jerusalem several incidents which threatened to develop into blood feuds between prominent Muslim families, a meeting was held in Qutala's house to see what could be done to prevent the trouble. It was at this meeting that Qutala made the observation that when Jews come to Palestine from all parts of the world, they unite here simply as Jews, and he deplored the fact that Arabs native to Palestine should be disunited by petty differences and family feuds. He went on to suggest the formation of a Muslim Brotherhood association in Palestine. The idea was received with such enthusiasm that correspondence was immediately exchanged with the Cairo headquarters of the movement, which immediately promised all possible support. One of al-Banna's deputies, Sheikh Saeed Ramadan, I don't know if you know Tariq Ramadan, very famous in Europe, he's the father of, Saeed Ramadan is the father of Tariq Ramadan. He came to Jerusalem to help organize the Brotherhood, and on October 26, 1945, the Jerusalem branch was formally opened with a good deal of fanfare. It was the first branch in this country. That's not mine?
The other arrow.
Sorry?
The other arrow.
Okay, sorry. As recognition for Qutala's effort, al-Banna, to whose control the Jerusalem group had voluntarily submitted, appointed the former as his deputy for leader of the movement here. Hodana, however, is reported to have felt that such an arbitrary appointment would alienate the powerful Muslim families of Palestine and would ruin the movement at its inception. He therefore declined the appointment and suggested that there could be only one leader, the Mufti of Jerusalem, the very famous Hajj Amin thing. The headquarters of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine, is in Jerusalem from that time, and the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine is financed mainly by membership subscriptions and the sale of printed matter. Occasionally, it receives assistance for a specific purpose from Cairo. That's to give you a broad understanding of what the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine was at that time. Now, when it comes to how the Muslim Brotherhood, have framed the issue of Palestine, the announced aim of the Ikhwan in Palestine is to secure this country forever to its Arab inhabitants. Now, I'm talking about official declarations. They are therefore the uncompromising enemy of foreigners or others who have different intentions. While they have not yet attained in Palestine the reputation for the degree of fanaticism which is commonly associated with the Ikhwan in Egypt, they are already a political power in this country, and Arab politicians particularly make every effort to indicate their friendliness toward the movement. Naturally, in 1945-1946, an organization of this character has attracted the careful attention of the political department of the Jewish agency, and for the benefit of its personnel, the agency puts out a bi-monthly report on the growth and the activities of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the Muslim Brothers, and the subject matters of which is not confined to their progress in Palestine alone, but which surveys the whole scene of their activity throughout the Near East. The recent agency, at that time, 1945-46, some reports of the agency, for example, indicated that there is no doubt that the Brotherhood is deeply involved, for example, in the arms trafficking which is going on between the Western Desert and Palestine. I'll give you a very, very striking example. So here I want you to focus, I don't know if it's readable, but you have this very famous sentence made by Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, just after the UN partition. I don't know if you can read it, or is it readable enough? Muslims worldwide, Palestine is the first line of defense and the first strike already represents half of the battle. Those who are fighting over there are only defending the future of your country, your lives, and your families. After all, they were defending their lives, their country, and their families. The cause of Palestine is not the cause of the East, not the cause of the Arab nation only, but it's the cause of both Islam and people of Islam. There is no need to dwell on the rights of Arabs in Palestine. There is no reason to impose or explain these rights, explain these rights. There is also no point of talking, making speeches, or writing articles. The time has come for action, protest at any opportunity and by all means. Cut off opponents to the Islamic cause, whatever their nationality or their identity, make financial donations to poor families, to homes that have been buying into the courageous fighters. Get involved if you can. No one has an excuse because nothing prevents us from activity if only weakness of faith. So this is the general framework of the Muslim Brotherhood, but more precisely when it comes to the Syrian and the Palestinian brothers, there is a very famous, at that time, a few weeks before the partition, I'm talking about October the 5th in 1947, a few weeks, just almost 2 months before the partition. There is a very famous appeal of Damascus from the committee, Damascus Committee for Defense of Palestine, which is first mainly, let's say, a Muslim Brotherhood creation. I'm not saying it's only a Muslim Brotherhood creation because you should not believe, or we should not believe, one should not believe, that the Brotherhood were acting solely. It's not the fact. What we have at that time, it's an Arab-Muslim, what I would call a conglomerate strategy. There is no such a thing as a sole Muslim Brother activity or set of activities. So in October 1947, we have witnessed the creation of the Damascus Committee for Defense of Palestine, mainly, but not solely, founded by Muslim Brothers. That's what it is, for example, what's their motto. Noble nation, Arab-Palestine crosses today the most critical stage in its history, and is exposed to the greatest danger over threatening it, Zionism. The United Nations organization will give its word on Palestine in the coming few days. This nation has always struggled and fought for the purpose of maintaining the Arabism of Palestine and has been generous in sacrificing blood and money to resist Zionist tyranny and British colonization. Today, you are called to renew your sacrifices and to resume the jihad for the defense of this holy land, which is the first qibla, so the point towards which the Muslims turn their faces in prayer, so in the very first point. And the third, sacred place. The word expects your word. Announce your opinion clearly and courageously that you will not accept a substitute for the Arabism of Palestine, and that you strongly disapprove of the cruel recommendation of the Committee of Inquiry which would make Palestine Jewish. The Provisional Committee for Defense of Palestine in Damascus, in answer to the appeal of the Arab Higher Committee, calls upon you to express your anger against the plots planned for Palestine, to share with the other Arab countries by sending out the cry of justice in a general strike tomorrow, the 7th of October, it was a Friday by the way, and calls upon you to meet following the prayer of Friday at the Umayyad Mosque to take decisions which will be transmitted to the UN United Nations Organization and to the various states. You will loudly listen to the appeal of duty. Damascus, giant fighting city which has always embraced the Palestine cause, shall be this time, and it has always been, the advance word for the assistance of Palestine. Long life Palestine, free and Arab. So the author is Mustafa Sibai, the Inspector General of the Muslim Brotherhood Association at that time. A few days after that, you know, the very first huge strike, was organized in Damascus. The Umayyad Mosque was jammed by more than 10,000 persons. The crowd contained the usual pious Muslims and whatever. And Mohamed Mubarak, the very famous Muslim Brotherhood deputy, spoke after prayers, warning that the decisive hour was near. He told his listeners to prepare for a hard fight, and so on and so forth. Another declaration. So at that time, for example, Mohamed Mubarak, he called Saudi Arabia the king of Saudi Arabia, so he could react, so he could do something for Palestine. One word from Ibn Saud can save Palestine, so that's the Muslim Brotherhood, that's what he's saying. One decision by the Syrian parliament can also help the Arab king and the Syrian parliament by cancelling and refusing the oil agreement with the Americans, can force them to stand with the Arabs on the Palestinian question. Another famous declaration: Syria strikes today in harmony with the other countries of the Arab world in protest against the decisions of the Committee of Inquiry, announces its determination to defend the Arabism, unity and independence of Palestine by all available offensive and defensive means. Syria also announces its determination to boycott economically, culturally and politically those countries which support Zionism. We do not accept other than the establishment of an Arab state in Palestine.
We have more time.
I have more time? Yeah. Okay. Am I slow? Am I too fast?
No need to rush.
Okay, because it's 5 minutes.
Yeah, you're wrong.
Okay, that's it. Other telegrams, you know, initiated by the Muslim Brothers came from Aleppo, because you had many strikes at that time, not only in Damascus, but only in Aleppo and many other Arab cities. One of the very famous telegrams, that's what he says: the Jewish state in Palestine will only be established on the skulls and bodies of the Arabs. Another one from Hamma: Palestine awaits bloodshed. She is hungry and will not revive unless the mountains and the valleys are flooded with Zionist blood. Another one from Zafar, another city in Syria: we thousands of demonstrators volunteered to rescue Palestine from the claws of criminal Zionism by force of arms. So I told you about the Muslim Brotherhood when it comes to Palestine, the appeal of the Damascus Committee, the first strike in support of Palestine in October 1947, and now I'm moving to the reaction at the Syrian Parliament in December 1947, a few days after the partition. So, mainly, the Muslim Brotherhood, and they formed a group of 30 deputies, you know, that signed a pledge to volunteer for action to Palestine, with people again like Mohamed Mubarak and other people like this. And we have the declaration. We have declarations, official declarations at that time at the Parliament from the Muslim Brothers, when it comes to a few days after the partition. For example, the 4th of December, Mubarak, so the Mohammed Mubarak, the Muslim Brotherhood leader, he pointed out that the country is not facing a religious but a foreign invasion, asked the House to register gratitude for the states which voted with the Arabs and disapproval of those who voted against, and stressed the House's readiness to allow £2 million more for Palestine. The Walibi, the Muslim brother from Aleppo, he said, America, Britain, and Russia have disappointed us. We should not give up because of the great powers of these states. And he emphasized that Yugoslavia, for example, resisted successfully the Nazis when they were at the peak of their power. And he concluded by stating that neither airplanes, battleships, nor guns could frighten the Arabs because they had enough faith in the justice of their cause. Another Muslim brother, Sheikh Mohammed Shatta from Hamma, in a speech at the House, he said, he spoke about injustice of partition, added that the House meeting must be adjourned during the Maghrib and Isha times for prayer, and suggested the abolition of cinemas and theaters because he believed that it was immoral activities, undermining the will and the likelihood, to be part of the jihad. Why am I mentioning the jihad? It's because a few days after these very, very famous declarations at the Parliament, on the 17th of December, the League of Ulama, including some Muslim brothers, the League of Ulama, a very famous religious organization, proclaimed, jihad compulsory, and issued a fatwa saying basically that for all true believers of Islam, the League's proclamation is a binding order to go to war for Palestine. According to its terms, any Muslim capable of fighting must fight. Any Muslim with money must contribute to the cause. And the fatwa also says that it also declares the field of jihad and eternity is open to you. Some questions have been raised, as to the authority of the League of Ulama to declare a jihad, but in the absence of a caliph, and because the Mufti of Syria, because at that time, the League of Ulama, because the League of Ulama was founded by Muslim brothers to a large extent, but the Mufti of Syria was not consulted, to declare jihad an obligation at that time. That's why it was a sort of religious coup d'etat. So the Muslim brothers, from that time and from that time onwards, they proclaimed to be the true defenders, of the sacred duty of jihad. And according to them, the official religious authority in Syria didn't do well, by avoiding proclaiming jihad at that time. It's okay? I'm going to end up, by, so that's basically, what I have to say. Okay. Also in December 1947, after the declaration of jihad, was created a committee for the liberation of Palestine. Once again, not only, but mainly, due to Muslim brothers. And this committee stated in an official discourse that the violent aspects of the reaction on November 30, 1947, so the day of the partition, were directed primarily against the American. Sorry, I made a mistake there. Well, anyway, so I think through. Okay, sorry. So the Committee for the Liberation of Palestine in December 1947 had other declarations, highlighting the fact that jihad was, from now on, a necessity and duty for the Arabs and Muslims in Syria and Palestine. And you had other demonstrations in Damascus, on December the 3rd, 1947. And that's basically, again, was a new opportunity, for huge demonstrations in the Umayyad Mosque, huge demonstrations against the embassy of Britain, the embassy of France, of even Russia, and the United States. So basically, within this time frame, that's actually how the Muslim brothers have reacted, to the issue, to the challenge generated, by the partition. conclusion now, because I think I have to end up. The idea of a Islamic radical reaction to the partition is extremely interesting, as I've tried to show you. But we can, and that will be my conclusion, my final remarks. The idea of what we can say in terms of the legacy of the partition in the field of political Islam. Because there is a very famous question today. We, for example, because of the war in Syria, because of this rivalry between Sunnis and Shias, between Saudi Arabia and Iran and whatever, we have, according to some people, a shift, very, very important shift, in the landscape of Islamism and jihadism. But historically, what we can say that the Palestine issue, the Palestine effect, has been extremely central, in the rise of religiously motivated violence, in the Middle East. I'll give you a few examples. I'm not talking about the partition, strictly sense. I'm talking about the consequences of the Palestinian crisis, starting with the partition. We had a change, for example, first of all, in how the Palestinian geography, the Palestinian territory was framed. Now it's no longer only physical and geographical reality. From that time onwards, it became a waqf, which means a religious property whose defense is for every Muslim. We have a desecularization of violence because of these new religious actors, or relatively new religious actors, who are now involved into the defense of the Palestinian land and the Palestinian people. Another example of what I'm saying is that in terms of sociology, not in terms of doctrinal and ideological context, in terms of sociology, and I would be happy to elaborate more on that, is that all the main Islamist and jihadist movements have to do with the Palestinian, call it effect or cause, at least in the Arab countries. The Hizb ut-Tahrir, for example, it was founded in 1953 by a Palestinian, Mohamed-Ali, which he used to be the Muslim brother, and because he believed that the Muslim brother had betrayed, to some extent, the Arab cause and the Islamic cause, he decided to go for a new movement, Party of Liberation, that was the first that explicitly at that time advocated for the creation of the caliphate. Another trend is visible within, the 50s and 60s, with a more radicalized branch within the Muslim Brotherhood. The idea, for example, of having, the Jews as the cosmic enemy of Muslims who say what it is to some extent related, to the issue of the defeat of Palestine, starting with the partition. And last but not least, the jihadist movements until recently, have been to a large extent influenced by Palestinian thinkers. I don't know, for example, if you know Abdullah Azam, the founder of Al-Qaeda, he is a Palestinian refugee. I don't know if you know about, for example, Abu Mohamed-Ali, one of the very famous thinkers in the jihadist landscape. He is a Palestinian refugee. Abu Kattan al-Palestini, who was very influential, for the globalization, for the spread of the jihadist agenda. For example, he was one of the ones who clearly influenced, jihadists in Nigeria. He is a Palestinian refugee. The founder, or one of the founders of the Islamic State in Iraq, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, he is a Palestinian refugee or son of refugees. So sociologically, we know actually that in terms of doctrinal and ideological content, the idea of Palestine being, having been lost, because of this new challenger, the quotes Jews, Israelis, Zionists, it's also something that we can verify in terms of sociology when it comes to who the jihadists are, who the radicalized Islamists are. They are not, it's not only a factor that I want to tell you about, but it's, whether we like it or not, it has to do with, these profiles of people who are connected clearly in terms of their own, biography and genealogy. They are connected sociologically, to the Palestinian issue. So I'm going to end up now. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if I was a bit fast, but I had to tell you many, many things, and I hope you understood what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohamed-Ali. If I may, I just want to throw out three thoughts that I had as I was listening both to Iqbal and to Mohamed-Ali, and both of them to decide whether they want to respond now or in question and answers. One is, and some of this may have been discussed earlier today. One is the question, the role of time. One thing that, of course, binds both the partition of India, Pakistan, as well as what happened in Palestine, is the fact that those that experienced, or many of those that experienced those events are still alive, and that memory is very fresh. Having said that, when Iqbal opened his remarks with what he called collective dislocation, and the focal point of for Sikhs culturally, religiously being now across a border, the thought that occurred to me is, of course, is of Jews who pray to be the next year in Jerusalem, and yet their relationship to Jerusalem is very varied, and so there's a question of time that comes into that. That also plays into my second thought in terms of identity formation, and that has to do with the role of political mobilization. In Pakistan, India is the rival, the threat, the enemy. It's something you can focus on. Palestine obviously had the resistance movement and the return of whatever form of governance to the land. And the third thought that I had on this was, you talked about the legacy of partition. And the Muslim Brotherhood, of course, is an organization that ultimately was founded in a modern state and operated in a modern state. And more often than not, actually operated in what was a secular state, certainly in terms of the way that it was institutionalized. And so, you know, I think it would be interesting if you could elaborate a little bit, not so much on how the Islamists and the Brotherhood in Palestine itself responded, but you know, basically transnationally. And particularly, I mean, that leads you also to the question of why was Palestine such a mobilizing factor and Kashmir not? I'm going to leave it at that, and you can either respond now or we can do that in questions and answers.
With regards to yeah, good. That's a good point about time. In terms of time, memory, recollections, retellings of the stories of partition. I mean, I could go into many stories that I've been told myself as well, but I don't want to take up too much time. But maybe just one thing that I can add is that there's also an issue of generation as well. So in terms of memory of partition and the legacy of partition, this is inherited. You find an interesting dichotomy between the generation lived through it and the stories they tell, and the stories told by the generation after them. And you find interesting, so in one case it can be trauma, and often the first generation doesn't even speak about incidents that happened in the partition as well. But the second generation is kind of vivid about the violence, because they have that disconnect from it as well. But also, the second generation onwards, you have more of a buy into the national identity as well. So it's interesting the way time generation plays into it.
There's also metaphysical. Okay, well, the floor is open. Who can I've got you over. You want to identify yourself?
Yeah, I identified one.
Okay, go ahead.
My name is Sevea, and I just graduated from RSIS. I'm from Palestine. Actually, I want just a few comments on your, like connecting the Palestinian issue with the radical Islam or rising of radical Islam. First of all, just one comment. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi is Jordanian. He is not like anything related to Palestine. He's not even son of refugees. He's from Zarqa, and he's son of original Jordanian family. Anyways, I totally disagree with that description of the radical Islam and this historical perspective. But actually, the Muslim Brotherhood recently, not in the 40s or 50s, was introduced in 1988 as a resistant movement, which is called Hamas, and it was influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, from Hassan Banna and all the leaders. And after that, like it's been only 30 years, if we can say that the age of movement, it was like, let's say maybe a failure, or it was a substitute of the PLO and the failure of that project for the Palestinian PLO, Palestinian Liberal Organization, all these right or left movement from Fatah, other movements. So I think like even the Jihad Islamic, we have the Islamic Jihadists or in Palestine or Hamas, they never, let's say, adapt the radical Islam, which is we see in ISIS, we see in other Islam. And even this ISIS, they maybe have this propaganda about Jerusalem and we want to free Palestine, but they have never did anything for Palestine. So what is the connection exactly? I don't know. Maybe that the propaganda they want to deliver it to the world, but in fact they never did anything. In fact, even our Muslims organization, we call it radical, like Hamas or Jihad, they never.
Did you wind up?
Sorry?
Did you wind up? Sorry.
Yeah. The thing, like, I don't disagree with connecting the Palestinian issue with the radical Islam, because even like from both sides, the Palestinian Brotherhood, which is Hamas, or which is influenced by Hamas, they have other agenda, and they even declared it lately. They totally changed it. They have some influence by, but their main goal was objectives towards Palestine. And on the other hand, the radical Islam from ISIS to Al-Qaeda, they only said or have this propaganda about Palestine, and they've never did anything for Palestine. So I don't know what's the connection.
My name is Kattan. I'm a student here. So my name is Qasim, and I'm a student here. Regarding the caste religion first topic, that is, you mentioned even in your talk, if I'd like to ask about India. So how does casteism, how does like along with religious life, like the Sikhs in India and Muslims in India and Pakistan, how is casteism practiced in India and Pakistan separately, considering how the approaches might be a bit different, right? So how does it affect in India and in Pakistan the level of casteism? And secondly, you talked about the aggressive notion of various castes throughout the centuries regarding the Punjabi caste, right? Just like you showed about Punjabis. But if you look at it from, you have the poets like Bulleh and they're like the level of spirituality in which they've tried to investigate through their poetry. It's pretty deep. And there are, of course, love folklores or folk stories as well. So why such a paradoxical view of Punjabis is seen, considering one side is deep spirituality, but the other one is outright aggression?
We'll take one more question. The gentleman just down there.
This question is for Professor Sevea. My name is Manraj. I'm a sophomore at Yale Ethics College. I'm originally from Amritsar. So one question is about the Urdaus. The reference to Nankana Sahib was obviously added after 1947 by SJPC, which was, I can only officially strongly suspect, was intertwined with the Punjabi politicians and Khalistani elements at that time, so Master Dara Singh and others. So do you think that's a pro-India bias that we've read into the story? Because I'm assuming Nankana Sahib itself doesn't say, oh, we're separated from the Golden Temple. They say we're separated from ourselves or something, essentially. The second question is about the march for masculinity in Punjabi cinema. As Qasim already said, it's quite paradoxical to what we found before, and then the heavy Sufi spirituality in Punjabi poetry, and how that functions for other people in Pakistan. So areas in Balochistan, northwest frontier, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So the question is, if that turns out to be problematic for other people in Pakistan, and what can be done about that?
Thank you. Do you want to address the first question?
Yes, that's also your question. Actually, so how he has some Palestinian descent, he has some belief in. But in Jordan, everybody is more or less connected to Palestine. Yeah. First of all, the definition of what to be a Jordanian means, we can spend hours on that, but he has some affiliation with Palestinian people. I'm not saying that's the only affiliation he has, or he used to have, but he has some. And he was trained, educated with Palestinians, and he was, in his mind, Palestinian to a large extent. And he has books, at least he has chapters on his affiliation with the Palestinian spirit. Then your question, thank you very much. I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to connect Palestine and Palestinian code to the Palestinian, as something which is by essence, connected to radical Islam. I'm trying to do history. That's connected to your question. It's why the Palestinian affair or issue has been so successful. Why not Chechnya? Why not Bosnia? Why not Kashmir? Why not? Sorry. First of all, because you have a very religious sort of framing in Palestine. You have the place of Jerusalem, which is, we believe it or not, or we like it or not, one of the very first, one of the most important central religious places for Muslims. I can give just an example. The idea of eschatology, where does it come from? It comes from Palestine. It comes from a very specific literature within the jihadist culture. The idea that in Palestine, look at Syria, for example. Why Syria has been so successful in attracting thousands and thousands of fighters from all over the world. There is never one only reason. Okay, we agree on that. But you have the idea that in the Shem, in the Levant, you have, this is where at the end of the times, we are going to have more or less, the final battle against, the Dajjal, okay? But I'm not saying it's true or not. That's what the people believe.
But then I don't think that the people believe that's fine. You're saying that
and that's what they're writing, at least. When they say come to Palestine because that's the land of, that's the place for the holy mosque for Masjid Quba Safara, Masjid Aqsa. That's where our prophet he went to.
What they write to think about what they actually think.
Of course, I agree.
The border is 20 kilometers from Palestine. It's very less from Palestine.
Yeah, but would you allow me one question, please? Were all the communists, did they believe in the end of, in the holy, what was that expression? The great evening, the great night. You have an imaginary, you have a sort of narrative. We have to pay attention to the narrative. I'm not saying that's the only reason. I'm not saying that, are they sincere or not? How can you answer this question? In their literature, in their scriptures, in their books, in their writings, they make references to, let's say, the role of Jerusalem. The role of...
So I don't want to monopolize this debate. I think the point...
I understand this.
Hold on, please.
You never have one only reason. You have the idea that it is an oppressed people. They have gone through ethnic cleansing. They are Arabs. You have also a matter of, like in Syria today. I mean, you know, there are very interesting studies made on foreign fighters, you know, the issue of foreign fighters in Syria. I'm sorry, but many of them, they go there for, let's say, positive reasons. They want to help the Syrian people. I mean, do they believe it's good or bad? That's what their logic is. I'm not saying that, to some extent, you cannot say it's good or bad. You don't have the right to say it's good or bad as researchers. But okay, you are telling, I'm asking you a question, you are telling me, you are answering that I'm going to Syria because of that. Okay, I'm writing. Why Palestine is so important to you? It's because it's the place of our holy mosque, it's the place of, many things. Okay, for me, so you are telling me that, Palestine is important to you because of A, B, and C. I'm not saying they are sincere or not to some extent, I don't care. That's what they are saying when it comes to justifying their political and religious commitments. I mean, if you're saying, just one example, when you have all these people with sort of Palestinian affiliation engaging to some extent into radical Islam, with Hizb ut-Tahrir, with some of the most important jihadi thinkers, I'm not saying that's the only motivation, the only explanation. I'm just saying that sociologically maybe it plays a role. Maybe it has some importance because I completely agree with you when you're saying that we had in the past we had influence and success, you know, of these secular forms of resistance. PLO. Okay, great. Okay, but we have other forms. I'm not saying that you have only one form of resistance and one form of let's say, the reaction, to the Israeli occupation, the Israeli challenge. I'm just saying that you have a spectrum of, reactions or different sorts of political engagement, and that's one of them. And you have, Palestine, in terms of, and that's my final remark on this, the Palestinian people, they are minorities, when it comes to the Arab and the Muslim people in the world. Do you agree with that? But when it comes to the jihadi thinkers, they are overrepresented. Can you ask me a question? So maybe the role of the Palestinian tragedy, maybe the role of,
Sorry, you can carry this discussion on afterwards. I really want to
we can discuss that.
Yeah.
I have to be very quick on it. I have to be very quick.
Okay. I've got Victor, I've got Rolf, and then I've got Ike. Oh yeah, sorry.
I do want to forget. I'll be very brief. Okay, so the first question about how is caste practiced. Caste is a very problematic term. There's no South Asian word that actually equates the term caste itself. So the practice of caste takes many shapes and forms as well. But what you often hear is that Sikhs don't practice caste. Muslims don't practice caste. This is often said, right? But marriage alliances, political voting, in Pakistan you often hear the term biradari being used. But after biradari, what is biradari? Which point does it map onto ethnic group? Which point does it map onto regional identity? Which point does it actually map onto Jat identity, Gujar identity, or locality identity? So it's a term that's what it is. So I would, of course, in the way Muslims practice caste, I would say generally you don't have certain of those you don't have any kind of scriptural claim to something. But at the same time, you do have in India. I say this about India, and I can't say about Pakistan for sure. There are mosques in India, at least, where if you are from a lower caste, Muslim, you are not allowed to enter as well. And sociologists have done work on this as well. So some of the practices that one does associate with, one would say, what Hindu caste practices are actually replicated as practice in these communities as well. So just briefly on that. About Punjabi caste, I'm not saying they're aggressive. This is the valorization, this is a kind of a folk valorization, the kind of masculinity that most communities, you can go to raise the issue of Balochistan, they have their own balance. The reason I used these films was that throughout the 1970s and 1980s, it was actually Punjabi cinema in Pakistan which dominated the media, not even Urdu cinema could match up to this. This was the biggest market. These were the films that produced, and they happened to celebrate certain identities in the way that they did. So I used that in that example. And I don't think it's a dichotomy. The Shia, the Sunni, what am I saying? The Sufi idea and that. I'll give you a simple example, right? We have no original version of the Dullah Bhatti story, but everybody who sings this story says that this story was originally written by Shah Hussain, the Sufi. And the Shah Hussain was very good friends with Dullah Bhatti. So this is a real dichotomy. And the other thing is, if I can just diverge a little bit, right? We often hear these things today about Sufism, internal meditation. Sufis have been very actively political. Sufis have also been aggressive as well. Sufis have taken part in wars as well. So it doesn't mean that we should treat this dichotomy. But the other thing about, leading up to your point as well, what is really interesting about these stories is that when you hear about Jat being aggressive and masculine, you hear about Gujrat, where this is actually coming from is from colonial categorizations. In the colonial state, certain groups were seen as martial, other groups were seen as non-martial. These are the groups that were labeled as martial. So there's a colonial legacy that they draw of enumeration policies as well. Very quickly about you're right about the Ardas, this is post-1947, clearly as Ghana and Pakistan. In Pakistan, for instance, the Gurdwaras are not governed by the Sikh government, but a pilgrimage committee from India. They have their own Gurdwara board in Pakistan. And so they don't have such a line drawn. And I think more than a pro-India bias, it's just that this group happened to control institutions there. But what is really interesting, and I'll come back to where I started off in the paper, is the Sikh identity really comes about from the 1920s to the 1950s.
So Singh Sabha era.
The Singh Sabha era onwards. And the 1940s is a pivotal moment about defining orthodoxy. I mean, the first time Sikhs appear as a census community that is separate from Hindu is actually 1921. Yeah. So it's subsequent to that the definitions start to arise. And in the 1940s, this was a period, the post-partition era happens to be the period in which they're defining orthodoxy, who's the authority over these shrines as well. So it's a debate about, okay, so we have these shrines, can the SDPZ actually claim to govern them? And therefore, it's an attempt by themselves to shape this at last. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I've got 4 people for the second round. Victor?
Thank you, James. Got a question, or 2 questions for Mohamed-Ali. My first question is, these statements that you were reading, or any you were reading of speech by the Muslim Brotherhood in 1947, was there opposition to, was there opposition expressed towards the idea of a Jewish state or the idea of partition? I think there's a difference between the two. And what kind of language or descriptions did they use to describe partition? So often we hear some other contexts, medical metaphors being used, like vivisection. What kind of language did they use to describe the partition? And then let me just add, was Palestine seen as a what in 1947? Is that how they measured?
I'm Wolf Partition, the director of the German Political Foundation in Pakistan. And as part of that, we have our Indo-Pak dialogue. And at this recent dialogue, we asked about the spectrum of time and generation. And there were former generals, artists, a mixed bag of participants. So they couldn't agree if the young generation is going to be, if it's going to be an advantage that the young generation has not with it, or if it's a disadvantage. So is it going to be a more peaceful dynamic, or is it actually worse if the witnesses are dying? And my question to you is, since it says consequences of partition, where are you on this one? Where are you sort of optimistic that with time passing, the consequences of partition will be less and less? Or, I think Ayesha Jalal would now argue, as long as the concept of partition is virulent in these countries, it doesn't matter which generation it is. But I just wonder what your answer is.
My question or other comment is really to translation of caste in Pakistan as Baradari is really very misleading. The word closest could be Zat, but certainly not Baradari. So I really disagree with you there. I was puzzled by your title, especially since this was a paper specific to the 70s and the 80s, which again is about context. What are you talking about? Pakistan has not remained unchanged despite the importance of partition. It depends on the context. And what you're talking about in the 70s and the 80s with reference to Mobilizations is really, I mean, you've chosen to sort of emphasize caste, what you call caste. Mobilizations is a film which gained popularity in a period where Zia-ul-Haq was in power. And Bhutto had been not just dethroned, but basically what people regard as a judicial murder. So this was a film that did well in the pro-PPP areas and badly in the non-PPP areas, i.e. Balochistan and the frontier. So it did well because this was not a story of caste, as you call it, but this was a story of good and evil, justice and injustice. And that is the reason why even Dulabhatti, between myth and history, constantly gets reenacted, but largely as an issue not of Jat or any such identity so much, but as an issue of much more universal reality, which is justice, standing up for the rights of the oppressed and exploited. So I do think that you may want to reframe this in order for you not to be exposed to the charge that you're taking these films and trying to give us an idea of quote-unquote caste, religion, and linguistic identity in Pakistan, Punjab. I can tell you that you're also sort of commenting on a period in which, because of Zia's rule, Baradari, so-called Baradari ties, which is not caste, were important because the political parties had not just been done away with. Elections were held on Baradari terms. Now, during Zia, for several election cycles, after him as well, Baradari seemed to be important, but I can tell you that Baradari in the last few elections in Pakistan is nowhere in existence. And what is important are party labels. So I would ask you to fine-tune what could be a very exciting and interesting study, but not get, I mean, it needs to be contextualized, otherwise this will just be misleading.
My question is for Mohamed-Ali. I haven't done a statistical analysis on this, but off the top of my head, I would say that Palestinians are actually overrepresented proportional to their population size in every transnational political movement that was important to the post-1948 countries. And I'm just curious whether communism is actually a good example, right? But I think there are others, there are lots of others, in fact. And also that the issue of Palestine was at least rhetorically important to nearly all of those movements as well. So not just the kind of personnel, but also the kind of emotional pull of the idea of the loss of Palestine. So I'm wondering, my question is just, is there something specific about this that's kind of different, or are we maybe looking at a conclusion that is about the broad political mobilization of Palestinians in general in the period of their exile? I wonder if this is maybe less about radical Islamism and more about the nature of the kind of diasporic refugee Palestinian community itself.
Which of you wants to go first?
Thank you for your questions. That would be a section in my final paper. Victor, first of all, in terms of statements, are they reacting the partition of the Jewish state? Well, in these statements, it's the partition, but actually it's connected. Because I mean, when they are saying, okay, Palestine deserves bloodshed, it's against what? No, here they are talking about the partition. That's why my time frame was extremely short. It was from October to December 1947. That's why I told you. But I have other statements more, that are broader, that are more, they are referring more directly, they are referring to the Jewishness, to the Jewish state, to the Zionist entity, to the Zionist colonial project.
Like the idea of dividing the nothing wrong with that ideology.
No, here is the partition. What I have, the extract I have highlighted is about the partition. It's, look for that, I mean, was it clear? It was very quick, I know, but I mean the idea. But the thing is, I mean, they are clearly reacting to the partition issue. They are saying, okay, now we have a problem, basically, that's the idea. Okay, guys, they did it. The UN did it. I mean, so we have a problem, it's called partition, now that's how we need to handle it. Yeah.
And the word partition is
sorry?
It just means the word partition, or what kind of?
The word is used? It's not very common. They don't really use the word partition. They use the word crime, they use the word intrigue, they use the word that's connected to your question. If you just allow me, I have the extract of one nationalist editor, so it's not an Islamist, but when Zionists with their money and intrigues were able to convince great powers, especially America, Russia, and France, to decide on the partition of Palestine for their interests. It is your duty now to tell your people that Palestine is a dear part of Syria and of the Arabs. It is both sacred to the Muslims and Christians, so they are Islamists. And the Zionists will never be able to take it except over the bodies of every Muslim and Christian, Arab in all the Arab countries. That's the idea of conspiracy, for example, is common. That's why there is no Islamist exception. There is a sort of broader spectrum. So they use the word partition, but it's quite rare actually. They use partition as a crime, as an intrigue, as the result of a plot, and so on and so forth.
What about the idea of waqf?
Sorry? The idea of waqf, the word appears, it appears in some extracts, in some declarations, in some statements. It's not the main one, but you have this idea, it's waqf, it is an informal way of naming it. It's an Arab and Muslim land. It is a Muslim land, it's land for Muslims. It is a sacred land. So do you call it a waqf or not? The idea actually came after that. It came in 49, 1950, and so on. And after that, you had this idea of now we need to theorize. I mean, the place of Palestine. We need to theorize. And it's going to be a question: what makes Palestine so special? Because, for example, you have today the idea of Syria. Syria is not a waqf, but it's Quranic, Islamic. I mean, then it's not like fighting in Kashmir or fighting in China, whatever. You have this idea that this place is very special. This place needs an additional, like for example, Azad, the founder of Al-Qaeda, he said that every land where you have Muslims, oppressed Muslims, it's a land of jihad, but the jihad is Palestine. Because the jihad is Palestine, it's against the main enemy, the Jews, but it's also the jihad is going to announce the end of the world. Because in Palestine you have eschatology. Because the final fight, the final war, the final struggle is between good and evil, and in his understanding of it, it's going to be Palestine. So that's very, the idea of, I'm going to elaborate more on this in the paper, but waqf as a clear, defined, conceptually and religiously defined in the word, it comes after that with very specific thinkers. Azad is one of them that we have. And the idea of Palestinians as more or less always overrepresented in the, let's say, it's true. I made the remark actually. Well, you have the Palestinian intellectuals, not every sort, not the nationalists, because you have, for example, the Iraqis and Syrians were more involved in going to the Arab nationalist narrative. Okay. But you're right. When you're saying that Palestinians are, let's say, they are maybe, especially at that time, they are like 1.5 million, 2 million maybe. So according to me, you have some. We can just assume some possibilities. The idea of having refugees all over the Middle East, Jordan, Syria, the Gulf, Egypt a bit, Lebanon, of course. So the idea of, let's say, forced migration may explain or might explain the fact that the Palestinian narrative, the Palestinian imagination was spread to the whole of the Middle East. It's an explanation. You have this idea, it goes back to the colonial period, that the Palestinians has been a million historian better than I do, but the idea that the level of education was much higher in Palestine than other countries. Because you had the missions, the religious missionary schools, you had a competition between the great powers, like look at Jerusalem. The geography of Jerusalem is fascinating. You have schools almost everywhere. And sometimes you have churches in the same place. So this idea of having a very quite educated people is also very interesting. So they have access to the language, and they have been in touch, with the colonial reality. But it's small, like in many places. But this combination plus refugees, plus the idea that you have one very famous technical principle, in terms of impact on the way people have framed their own tragedies, it's quite big, it's huge. It's like, you have, imagine today what we have in Syria. By the way, the word Nakba, that that it's not connected initially to the technical principle, it's connected to the defeat, the Arab defeat. So you have, we can assume that there are many, I will be happy to have your opinion on this. Palestinians are quite successful in making their ideas and history very well known. Of course, you have the idea that some governments have used it in terms of domestic and internal legitimacy. It was quite efficient to target the Israelis, the Zionists, the Jews. And then if you have ideas, I would be happy to hear from you.
I'm just thinking that I think you're right about all of those things, but that would suggest not so much that there's something special about Palestine for Islamist thought, but rather that Palestinians are generally so highly politicized that they have this kind of presence in every major movement across the region, right? So that, maybe Palestine has a special place in politics in general across the Arab world, which I think is a fair argument. But maybe that, I'm not sure whether it's a bit difficult to make the case that there's something kind of particular about this movement. Does that make sense?
It's funny, it's quite ironical, but you have this idea that Jews historically in Europe have been very influential in terms of intellectual skills. And that's connected because, I wrote a piece on this, I would be happy to have your opinion on that. The idea of having, a representation of Jews among communists, for example. This idea, which is true. Cabinets, one of them, they were Jews, but they were secular Jews, secularized Jews, and they wanted new men, new model for the mankind, So I'm not saying that it's exactly the same, but you have this idea of we need to go for a sociology of social movements. What makes a social movement, very specific in terms of composition.
Before I give the floor to Iqbal, I think there's also the other notion of, for Palestinians, but in a sense like Jews, the notion of going back is a very long-term thing and may not happen in your life. And therefore, the way you organize your life is no longer centered necessarily on a place, but in fact it's centered on mobility, because that is what you take with you. And therefore you also gravitate towards ideologies.
There is a very famous book, Salafi from Hazim. And Salafi means the orphan Salafist or the Salafist. The idea that Salafism, the Salafist narrative is very powerful because there is no longer a nation-state level. It's not a rooted people. They are no longer rooted into a very specific land. So the idea of camps, the idea of being, completely disconnected, in terms of geography. Geography and identity goes together. So you have this idea that maybe the jihadist narrative, the Salafist narrative is very, let's say, very efficient. It has a huge, let's say, bigger impact because the social structures are quite, let's say, are quite, let's say, redundant when it comes to making this ideology acceptable.
We have to, unfortunately, round this up in the next 4 or 5 minutes. I'm going to talk the very last word.
I totally agree. I wouldn't want to portray any community, any country or community as timeless and unchanging. In fact, maybe it didn't come out as clearly as I hoped, but I was trying to actually contextualize it within the Zia era, this reassertion of regional identity.
Your title is post-47. So
I cut it down for the talk. So I was focusing on that time period because that's the time period you suddenly have a reassertion of caste labels.
That's because, I mean, we eliminate political parties,
yes.
but that's not the case today. And so, I mean, you know, the question is, where is the carry on from this? I mean, Mr. Raji, Sultan Raji was mysteriously murdered in 1996. So what's been going on? I mean, has Pakistan remained in this mood? No. I mean, the point is that today, someone like Iqbal, who you probably have never heard of, is far more popular in the minds of a certain type of person. Now, who's Iqbal? He killed Rajma. I mean, you know, so the point is that these are important things to understand, that these things change. Dullah Bhatti, on the other hand, is very popular because it's a wider issue of you know, partly history, partly, but it's a sort of symbol of injustice, fights injustice.
Yes.
That's a very important symbol. I'm not sure how much of it is cast. But that's a question that...
But one of the main champions of Dullah Bhatti in Pakistan now is the Rajput Samaj. And the reason why I use the word biradari is not because I believe that caste is equal to biradari. It's a euphemism that's used now. So Zat is actually the word. Yeah. But the word being used by communities now is biradari. That's why I used that. So I didn't want to.
But what I'm trying to say to you, Iqbal, is that whilst in the Zia period it was Zat to be deployed against today it is more of an Islamic conception. And if you see the televisions of Pakistan on the screens, it's full of the military. It's not the love. Okay? That is the power of Pakistan. So I mean, to say that Dullah Bhatti can stand up today or Mullah Jat, forget it. That was Zia. Today Pakistan is 2018. Where is Mullah Jat? In the memory of the people.
I'm a historian, so I live in the past.
I mean, the question is that you've got to bring it up.
Yes,
I have some idea of where this goes.
Yeah, what I was trying to do was highlight that despite the fact that scholars have generally not dealt with caste in Pakistan, this is a salient category that does play out interesting. It's not just for Islam in Pakistan. That's what I was trying to do. It probably didn't come out as clearly as I was hoping. But I think
caste is just misleading in the Pakistanis. I think we need a different word. I mean, I can see linguistic identity, I can see Punjabi identity, but I'm having some difficulty.
Let's talk about it.
I think me both thank Iqbal and Mohamed-Ali for very stimulating contributions, and all of you for participating and contributing. I don't know if before we give them a round of applause, whether the organizers have the last note for today. Okay, if not, well, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dorsey and distinguished panelists. To close the workshop, I would like to invite back Dr. Victor Kattan, Senior Research Fellow at MEI US, to deliver the closing remarks. Dr. Kattan, please.
Thank you for lasting so long, and it's been a long day, but the discussions have been very rich and rewarding. I just have a comment for those who spoke today, that the institutes are keen on publishing your papers, and we have had expressions of interest from publishers. So if you do want to contribute in your papers, do let me know. I'll probably send an email out next week, or we can discuss that further this evening. But apart from that, I'd just like to thank you all again for coming. It's been great. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the workshop. On behalf of ISAS and MEI, I thank all of you for your participation in the event. We look forward to seeing you again. Have a good evening ahead.
The bus, yeah, it's 5:45.